They called her the most dangerous doctor in the state, not because she had hurt anyone, because she had refused to. Dr. Vivienne Okafor. No, that name was taken. The woman at the center of this story had a different name, a quieter name, the kind of name that doesn't make headlines until someone decides it should. Her name was Dr. Sylvie Harmon, 41 years old, Chief of Pediatric Oncology at Crestwood Regional Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. She had spent 17 years building a reputation on one principle. The child in the bed was the only, not the billing department, not the quarterly reports, not the pharmaceutical contracts that administration signed in rooms she was never invited into. That reputation was about to be totally taken from her. The morning the Medical Board of Ohio convened to hear the case against her, it was raining. The kind of rain that falls sideways off Lake Erie and gets under your collar before you realize it. Sylvie sat in her car in the parking lot of the hearing building for 11 minutes before she went inside. She was not crying. She had already done that, the night before, alone in the kitchen of the house she was still paying a mortgage on, the house where her daughter Maisie, age 7, had taped a drawing to the refrigerator that showed the two of them holding hands under a sun, with a smiley face. Sylvie had looked at that drawing for a long time before she turned off the kitchen light. She went inside. The charges against her were formal, clean, and devastating. Unprofessional conduct, violation of hospital procurement protocol, fraudulent administration of unapproved treatment. The board had 40 pages of documentation. Her legal team, 2 attorneys from the firm of Whitmore and Casson, retained at a cost of $18,000 she had pulled from savings, had reviewed every line of it, and told her the case was strong. That word, strong, had lodged in her chest like a splinter. She did not know, yet, how strong it actually was. She did not know, yet, that the documentation had been built by someone who had spent months preparing it. She did not know that 3 of the pages she had never seen before in her life. The hearing room was smaller than she had expected. There were 7 board members seated at a curved table, a court reporter in the corner, and 2 rows of chairs for observers. Sylvie's attorneys sat on either side of her. One of them, a woman named Patricia Dunmore, touched Sylvie's arm briefly before the session was called to order. It was the last kind gesture Sylvie would receive from that direction for quite some time. The board chairperson, a man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and an expression that suggested he had seen every kind of professional misconduct and was not surprised by any of it, introduced the proceeding. He listed the charges. He asked if Dr. Harmon understood them. She said she did. What she understood was this. 14 months earlier, she had treated a 9-year-old boy named Tyler Renfrew for a form of medulloblastoma that had not responded to the standard protocol. She had consulted with specialists at 3 other institutions. She had reviewed every clinical trial in the database. She had sat with Tyler's parents in a small room and explained, as clearly and humanely as she could, what the options were and what they were not. And then, with the written consent of his parents and the support of 2 colleagues who had co-signed her treatment recommendation, she had administered a modified dosing approach using a combination that was technically off-label, but had shown significant results in trials at Johns Hopkins and Stanford. Tyler Renfrew was in 4th grade now. He still sent her drawings, sometimes. She kept them in a folder in her desk drawer. The hospital had told a different story. According to their documentation, Sylvie had acted unilaterally, without proper consultation, without informed consent protocols being followed, and without authorization from the pharmacy board. They had fired her 4 months after Tyler's remission. Not right away, which would have been too obvious, but after enough time had passed that it looked procedural. She had filed a complaint. They had filed back. And now she was here, in this room, watching her 17 years try to hold their shape against 40 pages of paperwork. Halfway through the opening presentation by the board's counsel, Patricia Dunmore leaned over and whispered something to her co-counsel. The co-counsel, a younger man named Hargrove, who had always struck Sylvie as slightly allergic to eye contact, whispered back. Dunmore wrote something on a notepad and slid it to Sylvie. We may have a problem with exhibits 14 and 17. Sylvie had read those exhibits. They were pharmacy authorization logs. They showed her signature approving a procurement order she had no memory of approving. She wrote back, "I know. I told you." Dunmore nodded slowly. The way people nod when they are processing something they do not want to be processing. The board broke for 15 minutes at 10:45. Sylvie stood in the hallway and drank bad coffee from a paper cup. Through the window at the end of the corridor, she could see the rain still coming down. A man in a gray maintenance uniform was pushing a floor buffer along the far end of the hall, the machine making its low circular hum, the kind of sound you stop hearing after a while. She noticed him only because he stopped, briefly, and stooped to pick up a visitor badge that had fallen on the floor near the drinking fountain, and placed it on the ledge so whoever had dropped it could find it. Small thing. She wouldn't think about it again for 2 hours. When the hearing reconvened, Patricia Dunmore asked to approach the chair. There was a brief exchange, too quiet for Sylvie to hear. Then Dunmore returned to the table. She sat down. She looked at Sylvie with the expressions of someone about to step off a curb they hadn't seen. "I need to advise you," Dunmore said quietly, "that Whitmore and Casson will be withdrawing from your representation effective immediately." The room didn't move. The court reporter's fingers didn't move. The board chairperson looked at his papers. "The firm has determined," Dunmore continued, "that there is a material conflict of interest that we were not aware of at the time of engagement." Sylvie said, "What conflict?" Dunmore did not answer that question. She began gathering her documents. Her co-counsel was already closing his briefcase. "Patricia." Sylvie's voice was very level. She had spent years learning to make her voice level in rooms where children were dying. "What conflict of interest?" "I'm sorry, Dr. Harmon." And Dunmore, she walked out. Hargrove followed. The door closed behind them. The chairperson removed his reading glasses from his forehead and put them on. "Dr. Harmon, do you have anyone to represent you in this matter?" The room waited. 7 board members. The court reporter. The board's counsel, who was looking at his papers with the careful neutrality of a man who had expected this. Sylvie thought about Maisie. She thought about the smiley-faced son. She thought about Tyler Renfrew in the 4th grade. She said, "I need a moment." And it was then, in that specific and terrible moment of silence, that the door at the back of the room opened. Not dramatically. It opened the way doors open when someone isn't sure they should be opening them. The man who came through it was wearing the gray uniform of the building's maintenance staff. He was holding a folder. He was 38 years old. Though he looked slightly older around the eyes, the way men do when they have been doing the work of 2 people for a long time. His name was Dean Purcell. He was a building services technician at the Ohio Professional Licensing Center. He had worked there for 6 years. He had a daughter named Cleo, age 5, who he picked up from her daycare on Morrow Street every afternoon at 5:15, and who had that morning tucked a folded piece of paper into the front pocket of his jacket before he left the house. He stopped just inside the door. "Excuse me," he said to the room. His voice was quiet, not uncertain, just quiet, the way a person's voice is when they've thought carefully about what they're about to say. "My name is Dean Purcell. I'm maintenance here. I was in the records room this morning, doing a repair on the HVAC unit behind the east wall, and I found something I think this board needs to see." The chairperson looked at him over his glasses. "This is a formal proceeding, Mr. Purcell." "I know it is. I've been in this building 6 years. I know what a formal proceeding is." He held up the folder. "I found a document in the records room that I believe is relevant to the exhibits being presented today. I don't know your protocols for this, but I know that if I walk back out that door, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I had something in my hands that mattered and I put it down." There was a silence that had a different quality than the silences before it. The board's counsel said, "This is highly irregular." "Yes," Dean said. "It is." The chairperson looked at the document. He looked at Dean. He looked at Sylvie, who was watching this man she had never seen before with an expression she couldn't quite organize into a feeling yet. "What is it you found?" the chairperson asked. Dean came forward and placed the folder on the table. Inside were 2 documents. Both were pharmacy authorization logs. Both bore Dr. Sylvie Harmon's signature. And both were dated on the same day, a Thursday in March, 4 minutes apart. Exhibit 14 is timed at 10:52 a.m., Dean said. Exhibit 17 is timed at 10:56 a.m., some 4 minutes apart. Both of them signed by Dr. Harmon. He paused. I found these in the records room because they were filed in the wrong drawer. They were put in with the HVAC maintenance logs. I don't think that was an accident. These are the originals. The ones in your exhibit package, I've looked at the copies, they have different timestamps. The board's counsel was on his feet. This is completely. Let him finish, the chairperson said. Dean looked at the chairperson steadily. The originals show the signatures at 10:52 and 10:56. The copies in the exhibit package show them at 9:14 and 9:18. Those 40 minutes of difference matter because. He glanced at Sylvie briefly, then back to the board. I looked at the visitor log for the pharmacy department for that morning. Dr. Harmon wasn't in that wing of the hospital until 10:30. I know because the visitor system runs through our building services terminal. I see those logs. I've seen every log from that building for 6 years. He paused. She couldn't have signed at 9:14. She wasn't there. The room was very still. Sylvie was staring at the 2 documents laid out on the table. She was thinking about the splinter in her chest, and how she had never understood why it felt so precisely wrong. Not just bad, but geometrically incorrect, as if the thing being done to her was built rather than happened. She was thinking about Dunmore walking out the door, and about what a conflict of interest actually meant, and who in this proceeding might have an interest that conflicted. She was thinking about a man in a gray uniform stooping to pick up a visitor badge from the floor so that a stranger could find it. The board's counsel asked Dean where he had found the documents exactly, and how he had accessed the records room, and why he had been looking at exhibit copies in the first place. Dean answered each question in the same quiet, unhurried voice. He had been doing an HVAC repair. The records room had a return vent behind the east filing cabinet. When he moved the cabinet, the folder had been sitting on top of the adjacent drawer, filed incorrectly among maintenance logs. He had seen Dr. Harmon's name on the tab, and he had recognized it because he had been on shift when the hearing notice was posted in the building's administrative bulletin last week. He had looked at the documents because they had her name on them, and something in the timestamps hadn't looked right to him. How would you know what was right or wrong about timestamps on a pharmacy authorization form? The counsel asked. I don't, Dean said. I know what looked wrong to me. 14 minutes between 2 signatures on documents of that complexity, and when I checked the times against the visitor log, it didn't match. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a doctor, but I can read a clock and I can compare 2 numbers. The chairperson removed his glasses. He turned to the court reporter. I'd like to call a recess. I'd like the originals examined by both parties. I would also like the hospital's records officer contacted immediately to explain the discrepancy in the timestamps on exhibits 14 and 17. The board's counsel had gone a particular shade of careful. Furthermore, the chairperson said, I would like the building's visitor logs for the date in question subpoenaed and entered into evidence. He looked at Dean. Mr. Purcell, you will need to make a formal statement. Dean nodded. I know. You understand this may require your testimony at a subsequent hearing. I understand. And you're prepared to do that. Dean reached into the front pocket of his jacket. He took out the folded piece of paper that Cleo had put there that morning. He unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, a man in a gray uniform, and next to him a little girl with yellow hair, and above them block letters in a 5-year-old's handwriting that said, Daddy is honest. He looked at the drawing for a moment, then he folded it back up and put it in his pocket. Yeah, he said. I'm prepared. The recess lasted 4 hours. During those 4 hours, several things happened that would not become fully clear until later. The hospital's records officer, reached by phone, initially stated that the exhibits had been prepared by an administrative coordinator named Kurt Langley, who had been on staff for 8 months, and who, it emerged, had previously worked for a consulting firm that held a contract with the pharmaceutical company, whose competitor product Sylvie had used in Tyler Renfrew's treatment. That was the thread. When investigators began pulling it, the garment unraveled in a specific direction. Crestwood Regional had, for 3 years, been in negotiation with a company called Meridian Farm Group over an exclusive distribution agreement worth, at full term, approximately $14 million annually. Meridian's primary product in pediatric oncology was the protocol that Sylvie had not used for Tyler Renfrew. Her decision to go off protocol, her documented, peer-reviewed, outcomes-proven decision, had attracted attention from other oncologists in the network. 3 of them had begun asking questions about whether the standard protocol was actually the best option. That questioning was inconvenient. A doctor with a suspended license is not an influential voice in a clinical network. The documentation against Sylvie had not been fabricated hastily. It had been built over time, by people who understood how medical board proceedings worked, who knew that a lawyer's withdrawal at a critical moment creates a specific kind of chaos, and who had, presumably, not accounted for the possibility that a man doing HVAC repairs in a records room would stop and look at a folder with her name on it. The document folder, it turned out, had been placed in the maintenance logs deliberately, intended to be destroyed during a routine recs purge, scheduled for the following week. Whoever had placed it there had known the purge schedule. What they had not known was that Dean Purcell had requested to move the HVAC's repair to that week specifically, because his daughter had a school performance the following Friday, and he wanted to be sure his schedule was clear. Cleo's recital had saved 17 years of work. When the hearing reconvened the following morning, Sylvie was still without representation, but the landscape had changed in a way that made the room feel different. The way a room feels after a window has been opened, when you realize how stale the air had been. The chairperson announced that Exhibits 14 and 17 were being withdrawn from the proceedings pending investigation. He announced that the board had received, via subpoena, the visitor logs corroborating Dean Purcell's account of Dr. Harmon's whereabouts on the morning in question. He announced that a formal referral had been made to the State Attorney General's office regarding the alteration of official documents. He looked at the board's counsel with the expression of a man who has a great many more things he would like to say and is choosing not to say them yet. Then he looked at Sylvie. Dr. Harmon, the board is prepared to adjourn these proceedings pending the conclusion of the criminal investigation. Your license remains in full standing. You are not required to respond to any of the original charges at this time. Sylvie had not cried in the parking lot that morning. She had not cried in the hearing room the day before. She did not cry now, in any way that anyone in the room could see. But something in her face shifted, some sustained effort, some held architecture. And, for a moment, she was just a woman who had been carrying something very heavy and had been told she could put it down. She said, "Thank you." She looked at Dean, who was seated in the back row as a listed witness for the session. He was in his uniform, because he'd had a morning shift before the hearing. He had a small smear of grease on his left forearm that he'd apparently missed. He gave her the kind of nod that doesn't perform anything, just acknowledges, one person to another, that a hard thing happened and they both got through it. Outside on the steps, in a thin November sun that had replaced the previous day's rain, Sylvie stood for a while doing nothing in particular. The city moved around her. A bus hissed past on the street below. Somewhere inside the building she could hear the distant sound of the floor buffer starting up again. Dean came out a few minutes later, pulling his jacket on. He stopped when he saw her. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," she said. "I think so." She looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you came through that door yesterday, you could have just reported what you found to building administration. Filed a memo. Let them figure out what to do with it." He thought about that. "Yeah," he said. "I could have. Why didn't you?" He looked out at the street for a moment. "I got a daughter," he said. "She's 5. And I don't know what's going to stick, you know." What she's going to remember when she's older. I don't know if she's going to remember the trips to the zoo or the bedtime stories, or the particular way I make scrambled eggs that she's apparently decided is the only correct way to make scrambled eggs. He almost smiled. But I figured if I ever had a moment where I was holding the right thing to do in my actual hands, literally in my hands, and I put it down because it was complicated, I didn't want that to be the thing that stuck. Sylvie was quiet for a moment. She drew you, Sylvie said. In the drawing. The uniform.
Yeah.
He reached into his pocket and took out the drawing again. He looked at it. She wants to be a maintenance tech when she grows up. Currently. Last month it was a veterinarian, month before that, a bus driver. He folded the drawing back up. She's keeping her options open. Sylvie laughed. It surprised her, the laugh, the sheer ordinariness of it, the fact that her body had just done that in the middle of all this. She pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. Thank you, she said. I mean it. I don't have a way to adequately say that. You don't have to, Dean said. The investigation took 8 months. At the conclusion, Kurt Langley was charged with falsification of medical records and obstruction of a regulatory proceeding. 2 mid-level administrators at Crestwood Regional, both involved in the Meridian Farm Group negotiation, were named in a civil suit. The hospital's CEO, a man named Aldous, a man named Bryce Calloway, who had approved the original firing, resigned before the suit was filed. Sylvie returned to practice at a different hospital system. One that had been watching the case and reached out before it was even concluded. She took a position with a slightly lower title and a slightly higher degree of control over her own decisions. She was, by every available measure, exactly where she was supposed to be. In the spring, she received a letter. It was from Tyler Renfrew's mother. Inside was a photo of Tyler at his 4th grade class play. He was wearing a cardboard Viking helmet and holding a cardboard sword and grinning with the specific ferocity of a 9-year-old boy who has been given a costume and a stage. There was a note in his mother's handwriting. He made us come to both performances. He said the second one was better. Thank you for him. She kept that photo in the folder with his drawings. The following year, Dean Purcell left the building maintenance department. Not because of anything that had happened in the hearing room, or not only because of that. He had been taking night classes for 3 years, something he hadn't mentioned to anyone except Cleo, who thought night school was very exciting, and had strong opinions about what snack he should bring. He completed his paralegal certification in March. A small firm specializing in medical licensing defense hired him in April. He was not a lawyer. He was something different. Someone who had grown up watching how things actually worked, who understood records and logs, and the small procedural facts that determined whether a case held together or fell apart. He was, it turned out, very good at it. Cleo, 6 by then, was enormously proud. She drew a new portrait, her father in a different uniform, a button-down shirt, which she drew with approximately 40 buttons, and next to him, a stack of papers that were apparently very important. She labeled it, as she labeled most of her drawings, with a single declarative sentence. Daddy helps people. He put it on the refrigerator, next to the permission slip for her swim lessons and a magnet from the Columbus Zoo. And every morning when he made the scrambled eggs, his particular way, which remained the only correct way, he looked at it and thought that some things do in fact stick.